Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of The Serene View. And I'm Serene, your host. And today I have my favorite marketer. I could sit and listen to him for like all day. So join me in welcoming Hilton. Hilton, would you like to introduce yourself?
Morning, Serene. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Firstly, I've got to thank you for the marketing of this show. You managed to find such a youthful photograph of me. I have no idea where you found that photograph, but thank you so very much. And a delight to be here. Certainly hoping to have a great conversation with you and the guests that come on about my two favorite topics in the world, which is marketing and organizational culture, which are really two elements or two functions in an organization that I don't believe we often consider being a sort of superpower for each other. You know, that culture is this one remarkable element in every organization. And the organizations who do it well are able to reap incredible rewards from it, launch fantastic products, create this rabid fan base amongst their customers. And I would suggest, as much as marketing would like to take credit for all of that, often that's the result of their culture. So that's why for me, culture and marketing are like peas in a pod. And like I said, two of my favorite topics to talk about all day. I've got all day to talk about.
Well, this is a very interesting discussion. And for those of you who have not, heard about the Serene View, I really bring on these guests to kind of have a discussion to look at different perspectives. And it's very interesting for me because my background is in human resource, it's HR. And corporate culture is HR domain. And so here comes this marketer who wants to take it and who wants to tell us that it is, a marketing superpower. So yes, go ahead, fire the first salvo. Why is it a marketing superpower again?
So, Serene, let me be real clear. I am delighted with every HR colleague and every chief people officer who wants to lean into developing great culture. So, let me be really clear. This is a meal we can share. It's not a meal I want to take away. It's not a meal I would ever consider taking away from great people in HR. But I think the reality is, as a marketing person, I'm always struck by two imperatives that marketing has. One is growth. Ultimately, if marketing does its job correctly, an organization grows. It grows in terms of customers. It grows in terms of revenues. It grows in terms ultimately of profit. But in order to do that, it actually needs to get products out into the marketplace. It needs to invent new products where that's necessary. It needs to offer great customer service if that is what your business is about. And right now, that requires humans. That requires people. It requires creative people inside your organization to come up and actually create great products. It requires people at the front lines who talk to your customers day in and day out, being enthusiastic, being inspired, being wonderful in service. All of those things that require a human require, at least in my mind, a culture that allows them to be as successful as they can be, allows them to do what they were hired to do, and allows them to just be great extensions of the organization. That's why, for me, any marketer who can help the wonderful people that work in HR to create a wonderful culture are going to reap the benefits of that in the way that they deliver their products, in the way they deliver their services.
I think, okay, let me put it this way to you, right? When you say it, it sounds to me like a great company would be able to sell its products easily. Therefore, a great company will find it easy to market its product. That's how it sounds like to me, right? And but before we go into the depths of it, I thought maybe you want to, define a couple of things, right? Like, what do you mean by culture, for example?
Okay. Well, the great thing is culture. If you open Google, probably conveniently has 4,297 and counting definitions. So that's always helpful. If you want Google to not help you, you should open Google to firstly check on your symptoms if you have a cough, or try to define culture. Those are two scenarios that for anybody watching, I would suggest Google is not an excellent resource. But in all seriousness, when people ask me to define culture, there's some classic and academic ways of defining it. The one classic way that I like, it's how organizations act, behave, and make decisions to fit in. I think that covers for everybody watching this the sort of classic moments that they probably feel when they're inside an organization. How do I act around here to fit in? What are the behaviors around me that are deemed normal and expected? And ultimately, how do those things help us make decisions? How do we make decisions day in and day out based on what we believe is important around here? So I think that's one classic definition. The other ones for me that really sort of stick, and I'd encourage anybody listening to this to sort of ponder them for a moment. One classic for me has always been, your culture is defined by the worst behavior tolerated by management. So I'll let that hang for a moment, and anybody listening can sort of internalize that. So a classic example would be, if your organization says, we don't tolerate sexism or racism or any kind of atrocious behavior like that, but we still continue to have a senior vice president who says terrible things and acts in a terrible way around his female employees. The fact that that person isn't fired suggests that the culture will tolerate that behavior. And it becomes quite easy to say, well, if you're going to tolerate that, what other things will you tell me that you tolerate? Because not surprisingly, people look to the others around them and they say, how do we act and behave here? And they take cues and signs from that. So I do love that definition. Your culture is defined by the worst behavior tolerated by management. The other one that let me give you the final one, and I think that's
all right. Go.
There's only 4,300 more definitions to go through.
So you've only picked 3. Thank you for sparing us the other 4,000.
Exactly. Here's the other one, which I heard early in the pandemic, and it actually struck me as incredibly insightful. Somebody I was speaking to said, our culture, the way we look at our culture is how the edges of our organization behave on our worst day in business. And I was struck, particularly at the start of the pandemic, by just how insightful that was. Because what it suggested was, do the people outside of your headquarters, do the people working remotely on the other side of the world, in Singapore, for example, know how to act and behave when we're going through some of the toughest business environments in recorded history? So for me, that was a very elegant way of saying our culture and our people, regardless of where they are, regardless of the situation they're in, know how we would want to act and how we would want to behave. So that for me has been a recent addition to the 4,000 definitions. And it's probably one that will stick with me post-pandemic because I think it's so elegant.
I was going to tell you that I totally agree with your definition of it being behavior. I find that, I think you said it this earlier, culture is how the organization actually behaves. And the reason I totally agree with this is because I often find culture defined in terms of values. Oh, our value, innovation, integrity, teamwork, those are our culture. And my challenge is then that, how do I know, right? Look, I'm looking at you, Hilton, and whether you are a person of high integrity or not, I wouldn't know. The same for me. But we see this in the way that, the way that organizations behave.
Mhm.
And I think one of the most powerful tools in that is storytelling. And Wai Yuan has come on to say this, right? That marketing is really good at this, right? That
Mhm.
marketing is really good at storytelling. And that's really something HR needs to do better. Because the only way to get out there and to get culture going is really that, right? Is to tell the stories of what we will tolerate and tell the stories of when we did fire.
Mhm.
And I agree with Warren, right? We are not doing a good enough job, right? From on a HR perspective, we're not doing a good enough job. Marketing does a much better job of that.
Well, I would suggest that that's not, that firstly that statement is entirely true. I think anything that's related to humans, we relate to stories. I mean that is something we all know. That I think on a personal level, when we're at home or when we're in the office, yes, a great story can captivate your mind. It can captivate your soul. It can inspire you. It can make you fearful. It can inspire your curiosity. It can do anything. Great stories have an ability to do that. So that I would 100% agree with. Do I think that that rests solely with HR? No. I think that rests with anyone inside an organization trying to compel their colleagues to do something great and new and difficult and different. I think it lies in every single leader of a team to be able to tell great stories. Why are we doing this? Why are we not doing this other thing? Why is this thing so important to the survival of this organization? Those are all great and important things. And if you can wrap that in a story, 100%. But let's be crystal clear. We don't tell stories just to warm the hearts of the people around us. We tell stories to inspire them to action, to inspire them to movement, to inspire them to do something. So I think the other critical part is not only telling great stories, but being very, very crystal clear. Why are we telling this story to this group at this time? What do we want them to do with it? And how do we hope that it will inspire great and amazing behavior after the story has ended?
So we have a couple of objections already. So in Colin has come on to say, right, that in your last
Oh, brilliant.
definition, aren't you describing marketing as in the experience of the organization by customers or an external context? Whereas culture is really more about how people behave internally and the experience that the person has of the organization, within the organization. I presume that's what he meant.
So, firstly, I've got to thank Colin for coming on. Colin is one of my favorite writers around the culture topic. So, sadly, I can only see the little picture of him in the bottom left of my screen, but delighted that Colin is here.
Yes.
So, he's absolutely right. I think the traditional function or the traditional remit of marketing is absolutely being an external voice for an organization. It's been how do we portray ourselves in the market, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's absolutely accurate, and that is not something I'm suggesting changing on this particular podcast. But what I would suggest is any marketer who doesn't recognize the role of culture to help them execute either the business plan or the marketing plans that they have set in motion is failing to capitalize on the biggest resource, literally, the biggest resource of passion, creativity, enthusiasm, and excitement that they have at their fingertips. And for me, in simple terms, I sort of grew up with a perspective that marketing always seeks to find a sustainable competitive advantage. And I would suggest for organizations who can galvanize their culture, that is a competitive advantage. And as a lot of people have said before me, and will say, I think this is one of the truest facts of culture as well. Culture is a sustainable competitive advantage. if you can create it in a way that helps your business strategy move forward. It's sustainable. Here's why it's sustainable, Serene. No other organization in the world has your culture. They don't have your legacy of leadership. They don't have your exact processes. They don't have your long list of successes and failures. They don't have your hiring policies. They don't have your training policies. So here's why that's important. It means that no one can copy your culture at all.
Now, I was going to challenge you on that by saying two things. One is there such a thing as a consistent culture throughout an organization? Especially if your organization is, a little bit bigger, not all sitting in the same room, obviously. Also, whether culture, never mind organizational culture, any culture is ever a static thing. We talk about it as if it's a table or a chair, but it's something that constantly morphs.
100%, and it should. So let me try to answer succinctly your two excellent questions. Is there such a thing as a consistent culture? Absolutely not. I think the great Dunbar would say, at 142 people, we know that sort of networks break down and communities splinter and fragment. So scientifically, we know there's a magic 142 number. But I think the reality is, for anybody who believes in this panacea of a homogenous global culture within an organization, I think they've never gotten on an aeroplane and traveled more than an hour away from where they live. That's just not a reality. We're talking, I'm in sunny Toronto, which is why I'm wearing this sweater. It's only -4 degrees here. You're in Singapore.
Yes.
We may work for the same organization, but the minute you step out of your front door, your entire world is entirely different to my entire world. And to think that in your 45-minute commute or your 5-minute walk to your dining room table where you work today, that your experience of the world and my experience of the world will be the same. So to think that our organizational culture will be the same even an hour away is a fallacy. So I think that notion is one that needs to get put to bed immediately. There are subcultures inside organizations, and those are natural and those occur all the time. So a homogenous global culture isn't a thing. The second thing, and you're absolutely right about culture morphing over time. Yes, it is, and yes, it should. Again, if you look at culture as a way of enabling your business strategy, your business strategy will evolve over time. It may not change radically, it may not need to, but it will certainly evolve over time. And your culture should evolve to take advantage of those opportunities. Because again, for me, in the simplest terms, your strategy sets the direction, your culture enables that direction to be met. And that I recognize for everyone listening, that's an overly simplistic view, but I do think it's a way of looking at the intersection of strategy and culture.
Well, I have quite a few other questions, but actually there's a lot of comments coming in. So let's get to them first. Because my next question was going to be, right, which is like, look, it takes us years to build a culture, and you're telling me that we have to rebuild it every other month. Okay, but anyway, so this is from Tiffany. I know it says LinkedIn user, but it's from Tiffany Zamot. And it says, is the sharing of stories even tolerated in the workplace today? Or is it seen as time wasting and productivity killer? And how can we break that common myth? And which I think Warren has added on something which I thought quite interesting, which is that to your definition of culture, the stories have to be consistent with the existing behavior. And I put it this way, right? So it's a combination of two things. One, we kind of feel storytelling is useless, and what's the point of it? And then when we tell the stories, they're not even consistent with reality that I'm facing every day on Zoom. How bad can it get? Yeah. And I will throw in a third one, right? Which is, what if it is aspirational, right? Because a lot of these stories are what we hope people will do. to be very blunt, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think about all these?
Well, firstly, I'm going to say, I'm a little saddened that people would suggest that telling stories or trying to motivate your teams is a waste of time. You know, uh, I look at stories not as what they are, but what they're intended to do, their purpose. Why do we tell stories to each other? Why do we tell stories to our kids at bedtime? Why do we tell stories to our friends when we meet them at the bar? And I can't wait for that moment to happen when we're all actually able to get together and have a pint. Why do we tell stories to each other? We tell stories to each other to lift our spirits, to, suggest a moral imperative, to make a point, to inspire, to get our people to think about different opportunities, different possibilities, different futures. To me, that's why you tell stories. You don't tell them because you've got nothing else to do with your time. So I would suggest that for anybody who faces an environment where telling stories is seen as a productivity waste, ask the people who think it's a waste why I'm telling these stories, what I'm hoping to motivate in the team around me. Why do I believe they need to hear this story at this time? And what am I hoping to achieve? I think framing it like that is important. I think to the other question about existing behaviors, I think again this is a classic moment of the typical cynicism or skepticism that employees have between words written on a wall and actions they see all around them. I mean, if there is a classic chasm between fiction and reality in many organizations, that's what it is that organizations will spend a lot of time writing a set of values, which is an important exercise. I don't want to suggest it's not an important exercise, but it's about 30% of the way down the road. Writing those values and then not living up to them has been an inherent waste of your time. Writing those values and not being crystal clear about the associated behaviors of those values, Serene, to your earlier point, again, is just throwing out a word into the ether and hoping that a woman in Singapore and a man in Toronto have the same definition of trust or integrity or curiosity or whatever word is up on your list of values.
Can I interrupt you there and say this, okay, which is I often feel, and maybe this is the cynic in me, but I often agree with Wayan's next comment, which is a toxic culture can be a marketing superpower. And I've often found organizations to prioritize the bottom line, the top line, whatever it is, but basically to prioritize the marketing to the extent that, it doesn't matter what our culture is, right? I will not name names, but there are companies, well known for squeezing their employees so that they can give you the best price.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an extremely toxic culture that is very well celebrated. And they are, some of the largest companies in the world, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so what is,
So, this may be a moment where I sort of go off piste, and actually, somewhat ironically, was writing a post at the weekend about all the qualifiers we put in front of the word culture. We put words like good, bad, poor, sales, toxic in front of the word culture with a sort of carte blanche of this is a good thing or this is a bad thing. My idealistic, and I will say that straight up, my idealistic perspective will be your culture exists not as a warm and fuzzy exercise to have everybody kumbaya and hug each other and play foosball. That bullshit, and I'll say it deliberately, that sort of panacea is where a lot of organizations run aground. Here's the other thing I'd say about culture. Even if you have a great culture, it doesn't mean you're going to succeed in the marketplace. There's no reason that just because we're all sitting around loving and adoring each other and collaborating well, If all that collaboration comes up with a crap product or a product that the world doesn't need and doesn't want, you're going to go out of business, no matter how great your culture is. So I think we owe ourselves the discipline, and I use that word deliberately, to say, why do we care about the culture we have inside this organization? We care about it if it enables us to succeed in what we're trying to get done. So you talk about,
hang on. So if it helps us to succeed in what we try to get done, should we just implement okay, so from a HR perspective, toxic means the people are dying or they are going crazy. Okay, so it's a very simple definition. If your people are physically or mentally going ill, that's toxic. And should we implement that, because it gets us where we are going, it gives us the numbers, it gets us to the market share that we want?
No, let's be really clear on this one. I'm not sitting here suggesting, and there are probably two organizations that are probably worth over $2 trillion in the marketplace today that we're choosing not to mention by name or by the first letter of the alphabet for those who are watching. So we're choosing not to mention these organizations by name. But yes, do they have some incredibly concerning labor practices and HR practices? Without a doubt. I am not going to sit here and debate that. I'm also not going to debate organizations that used to be seen as great organizations are taking to things like union busting inside their organization. That's something we're starting to see in the US. And one of my favorite places to procure coffee is going through some union busting maneuvers at the moment. What I will say is I can't sit here and defend those practices, but I can sit here and defend how that organization may come to a place that says, what do we need to do to succeed? That large organization in Seattle that we haven't mentioned by name would suggest we are successful in the market because we have determined that people will pay to have goods shipped to them in the next hour. That our business model requires us to do that. That is how we are going to succeed. That is how we're going to continue to pay your salary. That is how we're going to continue to have wonderful stock and share growth that allows your retirement to be paid for by the fact that you worked at this organization for a decade.
Well, I think that Tiffany has a similar question. It says, so, see, I highlighted it because it seems you're going down that route, right? How could these organizations work to correct a long-standing reputation of a toxic culture? I mean, apart from changing the organization name, as some others have done.
Yeah. Tiffany, this is an excellent question, and I think we're at a moment in history where there's a really bright light being shone on this topic across the world. I mean, everybody that's watching this is no doubt got the same LinkedIn feed that I have that says the great resignation, the great reshuffling, the great whatever. I think because collectively the 7 billion people on the planet, or probably the 1.5 billion who have the luxury of working from home with high-speed internet and have a job like this, those people are looking around and saying, am I in the right place? Am I in an organization where, in simple terms, I'm seen, I'm heard, I'm appreciated, and I can do meaningful work? I think after 2 years of being fatigued, people are legitimately asking those questions. And for many people, the answer is, no, I'm not. And that is obviously causing, some of the ripple effects that we're seeing. My question, so that's background to perhaps the answer that I would give, which is organizations very quickly will recognize that how they behave, how they fulfill their part of the employee contract, because it's a two-way street. It's like any relationship in the world. The employee brings something to the table and the employer meets them halfway and brings something on the other side. If that isn't a respectful two-way street where both sides are getting what they want and what they need, then it's absolutely time to move on. And organizations will recognize and see that if the greatest people are moving on and they're unable to fill them, then they fundamentally need to do something different.
Well, Colin has this was a comment a little while back, and he's saying that they agree that they're two sides of the same coin, right? HR and marketing, that is, and I love this comment, right? Accepting that culture is a thing, because his next comment is maybe it's not about setting the culture, but setting the climate, right? Setting the kind of the general weather rather than how would I put it? Setting the climate rather than deciding the weather is the way I'll put it. I'm not sure if Colin, correct me if I'm like putting words into your mouth, but beyond what he was saying, it says HR and marketing should be aligned, and marketing should also be involved in internal comms, because as Tiffany says, good practices often require good marketing as well. Like good internal practices require good marketing. HR needs the help of marketers, is what I think they're trying to say.
Well, firstly, thank you to both, and you got a thumbs up emoji from Colin. So you weren't putting words in his mouth. You were
no. This is previous in response to you wanting to have a pint with him, Colin. I'll have a pint with you too. Yes, but go on. Sorry.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to that as soon as we can make that happen.
No. He says I've got it. Okay, thank you, Colin. Go on.
So the short answer is, why does marketing do what it does, and why does HR do what it does? And in its simplest terms, what we're trying to do is create an environment where we're making behavioral change. I mean, ultimately, I don't market for the opportunity to spend lots of money from my organization. I market in order to create an environment where people will behave positively to the products and services I put out there. They will go out and buy them. They will go out and choose them over a competitor. They will stay with our organization because we treat them well. Those are behaviors. That's what marketing's about. It's not about, bright, shiny lights and getting to the Super Bowl with a celebrity-filled 30-second TV ad. It's about creating an environment where people actively choose you in the market. The same, I would suggest, for HR. We're trying to create a slew of behaviors inside this organization where we can make great products, where we can collaborate effectively and efficiently, where we can do what we say we're going to do. We're going to be able to have a degree of cohesion between sales and marketing and operations, finance, the gods of finance, and everybody else. We are ultimately trying to create a set of behaviors that allow us to be successful. That to me is the very simplest thing. We're trying to appeal to a group of humans, either inside our walls or outside our walls, to say, come here, choose us, and be successful. Be successful inside your company because you chose our product, or be successful in your career because you chose to come to work here, and it's a place where you can thrive. Again, I appreciate I'm being overly simplistic, but we do these things because it's about making behavior happen.
Well, I think you are being idealistic, but I think you're not the only one. So Colin has come to say that, bad behaviors catches up with bad organizations, and that the corporate graveyard is full of them. And some of the worst culprits in tech are getting found out right now, and they're getting pushback from their employees, and they're losing talent. And which Tiffany agrees, wrong. So it says marketing is about meeting the needs.
So
creating the behavior.
I'm just holding this up probably for the benefit of Tiffany and Colin and probably aging myself significantly. But this little thing in my hand is the Enron Employee Handbook, which I was a delightful recipient of a million years ago in the past when I worked on that business in New York. So people have often asked, so why does a marketing guy care about culture? And, one of my formative in my career moments was when I had the opportunity to work with Enron as a client. So I hold this book up, and I've been offered numerous amounts of money on eBay for it, but I hold it up as a personal reminder of how an organization can say one thing or say a set of things and then act and behave entirely differently. So to Colin's excellent point, yes, it's only a matter of time before your behaviors catch up with you. That's true for whether you're a culture or just a human being. Your behaviors will catch up with you. That is inevitable.
Well, he said something similar later on, talking about how marketing should be about meeting the needs of customers profitably and not spending huge amounts of money, paperwork, papering over bad behaviors, misdemeanors, criminal activity. I think Tiffany was the one who agreed that it is also ethics. And then he asked, can you get good culture without ethics? Now, I have even more biting comment. It says even a terrible culture is a marketing superpower, says Warren. And some superpowers hurt and people will stay away from superpowers. Well, Warren, let me say this, right? In the history of humanity, superpowers often hurt other countries, people, and so forth. And they last. They last hundreds of years. They get even more powerful. I mean, our history as a human race is littered with them, right? So I know I'm probably more cynical than like all of you here, but everybody seems to think that they're all gonna go out, there can't be good culture without good ethics, and all these people will end up in the graveyard and so forth. Well, if human history and I mean, we've not had corporations for a very long time, but we have had countries for a very long time, and if you look at that as a harbinger, well, then no, not really.
No, I mean, if and I say this with love and affection to all the people asking such great questions, such deeply philosophical questions, because I think these are things that decent, and I use that word deliberately, I think decent organizational leaders grapple with this all the time. I think people who have a high level of integrity, have a high level of moral authority, have a high level of, I'm going to say, sort of personal humanity, grapple with these decisions all the time. So yes, I'm not going to sit here and ever suggest that humans have a wonderful, have a history of doing the best by each other all the time, because that would be a bald-faced lie. We don't. We do things to advance our own personal causes. We do things to take advantage of others if we think it's going to move our particular peanut forward. That's human history. That's unfortunately how many humans choose to act. I think the question, at the risk of this straying into geopolitics at a moment where there are tensions in Eastern Europe and a Olympic Games that is under some scrutiny, it is far outside my area of expertise to make comments on geopolitical moves. But I would ultimately say this comes down to an individual choice. Individual choice that every person who leads a team, who has the privilege of leading other humans, has a moment to look in the mirror and say, how will I choose to act in this moment? How will I choose to behave towards the people entrusted to me? And what am I prepared to do to ensure that I can get the very best from them, the best of their curiosity, the best of their creativity, the best of their intelligence? But Serene, I would say to you, that is ultimately an individual choice. So I'm never gonna sit here and say there are going to be people in the world who always do the right thing by the people around them.
No,
Sorry.
I'm not suggesting that at all. It's just that if you look at human history, right? I mean,
Mhm,
colonization, the empires that come up and go,
mhm,
and you look at what has been done, right? I
mhm,
will say that longevity of an empire is related to its power, like
mhm,
sheer power,
mhm,
and not to its goodness or lack thereof, right?
mhm.
So obviously there have been, I hesitate to say good empires, but certainly less egregious ones compared to others. And the longevity of any of them has nothing to do at all with how good, by our standards. Obviously, we run at different standards compared to, say, the Vikings, as anything else, right? But I think moving on, people are very taken with your idea of behavioral modification. So
Which,
Ryan says he really likes the angle of that, and Colin has said that behavior is the common link.
well, I mean, let's be honest. At the end of my idealism and at the end of all of this stuff, I mean that the the simple truth of any organization that wants to be successful, and this goes back to the fundamentals of strategy. It's about choices. What you choose to do, and importantly, what you choose not to do. Anybody who's listening to this, who's a student of Michael Porter, or more recently, folks like Roger Martin, will understand that's the principle of any strategy. I will choose to do this thing, and I will choose deliberately not to do that thing. And that extends, that choice matrix extends all the way through the organization, every minute of every day. How will I choose to act in this moment with the people around me? What will I choose to do, and what will I choose not to do? And what is the impact and implications of acting in that fashion? That's something each of us gets to take into an organization every day. So I would suggest, or I would hope, that many of the leaders that are currently in positions where they have other people working with them and for them is they take a moment's pause and say, how am I behaving in this moment to the other humans in my care? And am I going to do the right thing by them in order for us all to be successful?
Well, Colin is correcting me to say that organizations aren't countries. Countries don't lose their citizens or their territories. People migrate. They become refugees if they have to migrate. But he says organizations can easily lose their employees and their
100%.
markets. Yeah.
And
And
Colin is absolutely right. I mean, I don't want to take. I'm going to take one organization, and I hope people don't see this as a. Well, I'm going to say it's a convenient use case. Microsoft, perhaps to me, is the greatest example of an organization that was particularly successful at a period in history, both societal and human history, where acting and behaving in a certain way got them to the very pinnacle of business success. And then continuing to act in that fashion actually was the cause of a significant demise within the organization. Quarter after quarter of systemic losses and failures and inability to be successful. And lo and behold, in 2014, along comes an internal person charged with turning the organization around. And anyone who's watched what Satya Nadella has done to Microsoft will recognize the impact of having somebody who focused on culture as a turnaround for that organization. And to me, it's probably the greatest example I've ever seen of how an organization can be successful at a period in time, lose its way significantly, and then require a leader with a different opinion, a different perspective, and a different way of galvanizing their people to turn it around. That's the only example I can think of, because candidly, very few organizations have done that so significantly and so visibly in the way that Satya Nadella has done it with Microsoft.
I mean, I was gonna say Disney, but I think that shows my age, because Disney did it a long time ago. I think much longer ago. But Tiffany was saying that we don't seem to have learned the lessons of the past, and what can we do? And I think Wai Yuan has answered to say that maybe we are hardwired to repeat the actions of the past, and whether that's because we are narrowly focused on what's possible because we've evolved in the short term. I had a very interesting discussion about this with with some people, and we talked about what is short term, right? I think for us, we often look at what is what this year, this quarter, you know, or is it 100 years? So I'm ethnically Chinese. I'm not from China, but ethnically I'm Chinese. And we looked at several like 1,000 generations, I think, after you, and because we are a very begrudging people. We remember for a very long time. So if you have no idea how it works, the Chinese have written history for a while. And so if you go to China and you go to certain places, you can still spit on an effigy of a traitor that has betrayed the country 3,000 years ago. So when they say that you will be remembered for 1,000 win 1,000 autumns, that's not an hyperbole. But what I also wanted to say is it true that we are doomed to repeat this, lessons of the past? You talked about Microsoft, you talked about, people losing their way. And I think we have seen organizations lose their way. Mm-hmm. What keeps them doing this over and over again?
Well, firstly, I'm fascinated by Chinese culture. I think, like many in the West, such a remarkably colorful and vibrant culture. And the notion of 1,000 autumns, yes, I've certainly heard that reference. Look, I think the very short answer is, again, this is a classic platitude, and I apologize for using it, but as they say, if you're not a student of history, then you are bound to repeat it. I mean, that's a phrase I'm sure is understood around the world. If you don't look at history, you're bound to repeat it. And I would imagine anybody looking at the global environment right now will see shades of what happened, before 1914 or before 1939, and be concerned. I think the same is obviously true in business. Business is part of societal history. So if you don't look at the errors of the past and interrogate why those happened and how those could have been avoided, then it's absolutely appropriate that you will walk straight into the same wood chipper or trap of those people before you. So yes, being a student of history is critically important. I think the other separate thing, and again, this is not a news flash for anybody listening to this particular webcast. We are dangerously obsessed with 90-day windows. That is a universal truth that is written about by infinitely smarter, more elegant, and more eloquent people than myself. And I will say, Colin Newland is one of those people, elegant and eloquent. So anybody listening, I would strongly encourage to follow Colin on LinkedIn, and to certainly subscribe to his weekly newsletter, Decrapify Work. Probably the best title for any culture newsletter I've come across.
Yes, I totally agree with you on that. Yes,
there's no ambiguity in Colin's perspective, for which I absolutely adore him. The reality is, yes, we have and we entered a dangerous world, and we've seen the repercussions of it when we entered into the 90-day cycle of analyst calls as the beating stick for which most organizations act and behave. Is that changing? Yes, it is. In certain areas, an increased focus on ESG, the work by Blackstone and other firms like that. Larry Fink is sort of moving that movement forward of trying to convince CEOs and business leaders to look beyond 90 days and see the long-term implications of how they act and behave as an organization, and see the echo of 1,000 autumns in front of them to say, if you choose to continue to act in this fashion, what will be your legacy? How will history remember your organization? And how will history remember you as the leader of that organization? So do I think we have a short-term focus? Yes. Do I see signs that it is changing? Absolutely. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing for the humans inside our organizations in particular.
Well, Tiffany has come back to talk about Gallup. So I'm a Gallup coach myself, and context is really talking about the past and what is the context of our current situation. And it's actually rated as one of the lowest, apparently. And it speaks to a behavioral default, and thinking about it. I think we do have an obsession with the future, an obsession with, what can the future bring? What is the new technology and so on that has come about? I challenged somebody I've spoken to recently who said that, many of these tech companies have changed the world. And I was like, they have not changed the world. They have made it easier for us to do the things that we have always done, like discriminating against each other, for example, spending more money than we can earn, and quite obviously sprouting off without thinking much. We've always done it. It's just that tech has enabled us to do it easier, faster, right? And when we look at it in terms of that, right, Tiffany's next question is, how do we learn from this? I mean, how do we move forward with better wisdom?
Wow, I adore all the questions that Tiffany's asked. I hope next time, if I have the opportunity to appear with you guys, that Tiffany asks infinitely simpler questions. And I say that as a mark. I say that as a mark of affection, not as a criticism.
She has another question that I skipped because I'm not sure whether you want to answer it. Where
No.
way ago, talking about you were saying about 30%. I will ask you that as the next follow-up question today. So please carry on.
Yes. I think Tiffany's question is a brilliant and gorgeous one, and I am genuinely thankful that she asked it. Yes, I think ignoring context and ignoring history, you're only fooling yourself. Whether that's individually as a leader, as a member of a team, if you consider that what happened yesterday has no bearing on what happens tomorrow, and again, I don't think you're a student of human behavior. Context is a powerful motivator for good and a powerful motivator for bad. I think, again, straying into geopolitics, I think a lot of things have happened in history because people have felt deeply hurt, betrayed, or subjugated by other people. And that's forced them to act in terrible ways moving forward. I want to get my own back. I seek revenge, etc., etc. So absolutely, context is critical. But I suppose, I come back to, perhaps idealistically, the notion of what part of the context is important to inform what we don't want to happen again. I think, turning a blind eye to what's happened in the past is naive, but not learning from the past and saying, let's acknowledge the past, let's acknowledge what we haven't done, let's acknowledge the opportunity we may have missed by acting in that way, and let's reaffirm that we won't do that again. That, to me, is helpful context, instead of using context as an anchor for which you're going to act in terrible ways because you're now seeking revenge or vengeance or something like that. So that's my idealistic answer, Tiffany. but I do deeply appreciate you asking it because it is a great question every leader should consider.
Can I say this just as an adjunct again, geopolitics? Perhaps we don't want to go there, but just to say this, right? After the First World War, Germany lost and was made to pay quite heavily,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result, that enabled the rise of a very tyrannical regime, in the hope of getting back and being able to make Germany great again.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds familiar. But anyway, after World War II, again, Germany lost, but the world learned a lesson. And the world then decided, no, we are not going to punish them or make them pay the way that they did after they lost World War One, but
Mm-hmm.
instead we're going to help them and rebuild them. And
Yeah.
now Germany is, a powerful player in the world, and I
Mm-hmm.
would say, in many respects, towards world stability and
Yes.
world peace, right? So that's one of the things that we learn, and we do learn. I mean, I won't say we don't learn from history. We do learn, but sometimes it takes a whole world war to show us.
So
But I was going to give you another tough question from Tiffany. She says, "What is the 30% that comes before writing the values, and where does marketing enter the discussion about culture?"
damn it, I thought we were going to continue to talk about the benefit of the Marshall Plan and the start of the Cold War and the division between Western and Eastern Europe. Okay, so we're not going down that particular path. Okay.
No, you can. Like, please go
No,
ahead.
no, no,
Finishing that first. Yes.
no. Serene, I think kudos to you because I think that is a excellent example of learning from the past, recognizing that behaviors in the past are not advantageous and do not help and actually create larger problems for us moving forward. So I do think that's an elegant example, and I do think there's lessons to be learned for organizational leaders in exactly that context. We tried this in the past, and look what happened. How can we avoid doing that? And I think that's the classic reason that organizations enter into things like scenario planning. Where are we today? What are the possible futures ahead of us? What needs to be true for those futures to occur? And what can we do to ensure that we are ready and prepared for those? Because we've considered the various alternate futures that sit in front of us. So I think a great example. Now back to another tough question from Tiffany. What's the 30% that comes before writing the values, and when does marketing enter the discussion? My suggestion would be, and again, for anyone who finds my website and becomes the second person outside of my mom to read my blog posts, I write about organizational values through the following lens. I would contend that your organizational values is a great opportunity to create a moment of true differentiation between your organization and any other organization that you seek to compete with. If your values are intended to guide your behaviors and intended to guide what you believe will make you successful, why would you choose to have a set of values that are identical to everybody else that you compete with in the market? So, because they're an easy punching bag, I would encourage anybody watching this to go and look at the values of any bank in the region in which you live. And I will almost guarantee that all of them on their websites will use the word trust and integrity or words like that. Are those differentiated words? No, of course they're not. And I would argue anybody who puts up something so abundantly obvious like trust and you're a bank, isn't that stating the obvious? You can trust us with your money. That's the whole reason you're in business, Mr. Bank. I hate to break it to you. But you have an opportunity with your values to say, if we want to be different, if we want to be differentiated, if we want to attract talent that will enable us to be different and win in the marketplace, How must we act and behave as an organization in which to do that? And why wouldn't you use your values as a great signal to your people internally, to your talent externally you haven't yet hired, to say, we are going to win because we act and behave in the following fashions inside this organization. So when does marketing enter into that conversation? I would suggest they should be at the table at the very beginning, because that's the lens, or more importantly, that's the opportunity that you have when you craft the values for your organization.
I will agree from an HR perspective, because I think a lot of HR lack exactly what marketers do, which is the ability to propagate an idea internally. And from an HR perspective, I will tell you this: nothing's harder than changing the corporate culture, just for that sure propagation, ability. So how do we get this culture? A, for people to know that. B, for people to buy it. And C, then for people to act in this way. And I think those are, that's bread and butter for marketing, right? How do we get customers to know us? How do we get customers to like us? How do we get customers to buy from us? That's like, ABC of marketing. And I think that's what, HR really needs when it comes to culture. So I'm not sure if you're through with that question, because I was going to throw you yet another Tiffany tough question. So.
Well, I'm now going to be dodging Tiffany questions deliberately. So I hope Tiffany doesn't take that personally, but I'm going to be dodging her question.
She just posted a fourth one. Yes, go on.
Serene, let me answer or agree with the point that you just made. I think, the great, wonderful, and wise Peter Drucker says, an organization exists to create a customer. That's what an organization is there to do. That's marketing's job, is to create a customer for your services. And I worry that the world now equates marketing with communications. That is a segment of what marketing does, but that's not all that marketing does. Marketing is about creating, or ideally being part of creating, great products, great services, great things that advance humans in a great and appropriate fashion. I think the worry is if we only think about it as a communications exercise, that from an HR perspective, we look at it as beating our people to death with a whole bunch of posters and coffee mugs and sweatshirts and saying, this is who you have to be and this is what you have to do. And here's the t-shirt and here's the coffee mug and here's the foosball table. I think that is part of the solution. It is far from the entire solution. So I do think that if you're an HR professional, we should be looking in a broader sense to say, if this organization were to be a product, what is the best product that we can create internally? And that's not just about communication. It's about what is the product we're seeking to create here? What does it do? Who does it help? What does it make the world a better place by existing? How do we do that? And how do we create that environment internally? So that's not just about communications. That's about looking at what we do as an organization, why it's meaningful and important, and using that as the starting point, and then communicate the hell out of it. But to sit and think that it's only an exercise in communication means that all we'll ever do is bash people to death with coffee mugs and posters. And I think that is an opportunity missed by many organizations.
I completely agree with you. I think no HR or even marketing person can sell a bad organization, because unlike in the marketplace where it's covet emptor and there is a information gap between the buyer and the seller, in an organization, if I'm in the organization, I know what it's like, and no amount of marketing is going to tell me otherwise. from something that I see every day.
Yeah,
Right? And I completely agree with you on that.
well,
So which actually leads me to this question. I mean, that was the one I tried to field you just now, which is, what can we do, right? There's so much information overload, and so what can we do to navigate all of this and cut through all the marketing BS, right? I'm not sure if this is the same answer as what you've just given, which is first have a good product, or whether you have a more
marketing
erudite
BS.
answer.
Marketing BS. Tell me that doesn't exist. Tell me that doesn't exist. Look, it's a great.
It's like there's no HR policy, right? So there's such thing as HR policies.
Serene, look, this is a great question. I'm not sure it's directly to the conversation we're having. Truth be told, and I don't know the answer to this. I know the answer, at a personal level, I suppose, and that's perhaps the only thing that I can provide. Is how an organization, how it behaves, the same as what it says. I'll give you a personal example, and maybe this it won't answer the question. It won't answer the question, but it goes back to why I think it's so important for marketing and HR to be the two sides of the same coin. My wife and I ordered a new washer and dryer in the midst of the pandemic, and I've written about this in one of my blog posts. And I think I titled it, "Are you an organization of possibility or an organization of policy?" And the story is quite simple. We ordered a washer and dryer. It required the company we were buying the new product from to take the old product away. On the day of delivery, the people came and they tried to take our old washer and dryer away. Not successfully. And while I was on the phone at the back of my house, talking to their customer service representative, I heard the sound of their delivery truck driving down, leaving our house and driving down the road. I went back to the front of our house and discovered our old washing machine lying in the middle of our lawn, left there by the delivery people who were supposed to take it. And I had a moment, because I was on the line with the customer service representative, to ask, as my teenage daughters would say, WTF. And their response was quite simply, well, it's our policy that X, Y, and Z. And I sat and, this went on for 2 weeks with the same organization because we bought the washer and dryer from them. But the third time a driver came from that organization, he didn't act according to the hard line of the policy. He said, I have a customer in front of me with a legitimate need who just wants the old washer that he's paid for to be removed. And it struck me in that moment, as it does customers around the world every minute of every day. How is this policy, how is this rigid adherence to your policy helping your customers or not? And perhaps the greatest example in the world is Zappos, of an organization who gives autonomy to their people to solve the challenges of their customers in a way that they determine is most appropriate. So think about that for a moment. What am I doing to help my customers at a moment, the people who ensure our business continues to succeed? And Zappos has a way of doing it that's unlike any other organization in the world. And I would suggest at the core of it, it's because that's how their culture has evolved to actually make that a priority. There are other examples, great examples. Southwest Airlines is another one whose customer service ethic is grounded in their culture. The Four Seasons Hotels is another brilliant example where they have made culture and the way that they treat their customers a point of competitive differentiation And I would suggest all three of those companies have been successful over the long term because they realized that. So, Tiffany, I'm not sure that answered your question, but I would suggest the difference between what a company says and what a company does is the first and easiest way to cut through the bullshit.
I will give you this, and I wonder if you can recognize it from Colin, because he says, "Guess who starts with E?"
Yeah,
Is it?
yeah,
does it
no,
ring a
hold
bell?
on. Let me see if it's on page 6 of the little book in front of me.
No, show it to us. Show it to us. Flip it around and show it to us. No, show us page 6, and we all want to see
Yeah,
whether it is actually on page 6.
you know, Serene, when you asked if I'd like to spend some time with you on a Thursday morning, and I was delighted by the invitation. Thank you again. I didn't realize that we'd have people from the UK testing me. I didn't realize that this was going to be like a high school test and a sort of diploma. But I thank Colin very much for stepping in so eloquently to do it.
Yes. Well, he says that it's worse than BS. They equate marketing with lying, and also that beating people to death with marks and posters are just collateral damage. Yes.
Sadly, yes, and again,
Yes.
I think the thing is, organizations make choices around these things. It's easy to print up posters and it's easy to get a whole bunch of mugs. Yeah, that's easy, and I'm not suggesting it doesn't have its place, but I would suggest that the place of those things is probably number 396 or 97 on the list of what are we doing to create an environment around us where our people can thrive and bring the very best of their skills and talents to the fore. That's not through another t-shirt, and that's not through being beaten to death with coffee mugs, which I hasten to add, I believe is illegal in most, not all countries around the world.
Well, no, Warren thinks it's a brilliant. It's brilliant. It's collateral damage, and actually, I agree, because I often see this in HR. Right, yet another EDM, yet another poster, yet another, I don't know, another employee bonding session that we all get together and build teamwork. Yeah,
and then I think, as many of us have experienced, it's 45 minutes later you go back to the same reality, and that kumbaya meeting or that free muffin or that free t-shirt just becomes an artifact. It's not about the behaviors again. And look, people like Edgar Schein have done an infinitely more elegant way of defining those things. Yes, a t-shirt and a coffee mug is an artifact, but it is not the underlying behaviors, the tacit assumptions that are made inside an organization about how we behave and how we make decisions. So again, lateral damage notwithstanding, sure, send out t-shirts and coffee mugs, but make sure you do that after you've ensured you've created an environment where people can act and behave and bring the very best of their talent to your organization. Otherwise, it's just a t-shirt.
Well, I'm going to ask you yet another question on the Tiffany exam paper. She's asked, and I think this is a fantastic question, which is it worthwhile to shoot for ambitious values and fail to embody them from within the culture? Or is it perhaps a symptom of the word of mouth messaging about misaligned cultures? And I say this because, despite all the cynicism that's bandied about, most leaders I've met in the course of my work genuinely want to create a better culture. Mm-hmm. Even the behemoths that we talked about used to say, do no evil, right? And the thing is, a lot of the times there is this, shooting for the moon and failing to hit it. So what should we do? Should we even try? Or should we go like, no, we don't want to like run the risk of people turning completely cynical on us.
So my short answer, my answer would still come back to the classic thing of it's a choice. These are choices. These are not, there is no magic in what I'm about to say. This is a choice that an organization or an organization's leaders make. And I do, and if this is another Tiffany question, thank you for the prompt. But I did write in late last year around corporate cultures. You have a choice. They can be a placeholder, they can be a placebo, or they can be a propellant. You have a choice. You can have values that are perfectly adequate at any of those intersections. If it's just a placeholder, you put it up there because it's easy to do, and like trust, it's in everybody, every other bank's set of values, so you put it up there. That's okay. That's a placeholder. That's fine. But it's a choice. The same with a placebo. If you say something and you choose not to act like that, but it sounds like a great set of words and it sounds like a great set of things, again, that's a choice. But if you choose to have values that are deliberately intended to be a propellant for great behaviors, great decision-making, great action within your organization, that is a choice. So it's up to you what you want to choose. So do I think it's worthwhile to shoot for ambitious values? I think after sort of 75 minutes together, you probably know what I think on that topic. But it is a choice. And that choice sits on the desk of every leader and every person leading a team every day. What will you choose?
And I think Warren agrees. I think that's a really elegant way of putting it. Placeholder, placebo, or propellant, right? What do you as a leader choose to do? And yet another Tiffany question. I've asked them to throw their last questions in
Okay.
so, to spare you more.
Sadly, I do have a series of meetings to attend.
Yes.
But Serena, I must thank you. I could do this for hours, and
Yes.
and certainly the audience is nothing short of fantastic. I wish they would ask easier questions.
Well, I mean, a final comment. I'll spare you the question, but a final comment from Tiffany. It says, first, what a stimulating conversation this has been, Hilton. Secondly, it's been her pleasure, Tiffany's pleasure, to throw you questions and have you elegantly and eloquently dodge them.
I'm the father of 2 teenage daughters. I spend my days dodging hard questions from 2 passionate and empowered and brilliant women. So, Tiffany, please don't take this the wrong way. I have a ton of experience from my 2 teenage daughters.
Yes, and so here's to more fun and playful times like these. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to add in. I mean, this is the last question from Tiffany. What if people feel like they have no agency, because choice is agency? And what if, can we nudge them along with some clever marketing? Well, I will spare Hilton this by simply saying this, which is, I think if leaders, especially leaders in positions of power, feel they have no agency, that is probably one of the strongest indicators of a toxic culture. And if you are a leader in that position, then I would say perhaps it's time to consider the great reshuffle. So think about a place where, I guess, a place where you can thrive as a person, as a leader. And I mean, I've been in HR all my life, and I will put it this way, right? Which is, until the day that people choose not to put up with bad companies, we are always going to have bad companies with us. And ultimately, I won't say this for every country. I know there are countries where unemployment is 30-40%, and any job is a precious one, and so forth. But I will say that in many first world countries, like Singapore, Canada, where you are, US, where Tiffany is, that many of us do have a choice. I mean, I will not say everyone has a choice. There are many people in lower economic, social stratas that don't. But as business leaders, I think we do have a choice. And if we are not going to exercise that power as people of privilege, then I think we do a disservice to people who truly have no agency and who truly cannot take that
Yeah.
choice.
So Serena, elegant point, very well made, and I can't disagree with anything that you said. I think the one point about agency, and I think this sits with all of us. Agency has a requirement for accountability. I think anybody who seeks agency but doesn't want accountability is wanting their cake and eat it. So I absolutely agree that there are environments for which agency is not something that is given lightly. But for anybody who suggests they have no agency, I would suggest they have an opportunity to look around them and say, what in the sphere of my control, the things I can control, and at the risk of sounding like a stoic, that is the only thing to put our attention and energies to. What can I control? What is the loci of control I have around me? And can I take full and abundant accountability for those things? Because my suggestion to you, in any organization, if you're able to take full accountability for what you are being held responsible for, more times than not, you will be given more opportunity, because I will guarantee you that if you take full accountability for what you can control and move that forward, no organization I've ever seen will stop giving you more things to do if you take full accountability of what's within your control. But asking to have agency just given to you, I think, is a wonderful idea. It is wonderful for organizations who do it as a default. But if you operate in an organization that does not, my question to you is, are you prepared to take full accountability for your role and see it as an opportunity to earn more agency?
I think that's an excellent point. Colin has totally agreed with you. It's just everyone has agency, even with a small sphere of control, and be more pirate. Colin,
Amen.
I'm a little bit more. I think I'm a little bit more cynical. I have met people in very dire situations, and where they may not have the agency that we do, but I would definitely say that if you're a business leader, especially if you're a business leader doing knowledge work in a first world country, come on, you are probably in the top 10% of privilege in the world. And if you're going to complain about agency, that's not something I will buy, no matter how well it's marketed. And Colin has also made a great point, which is 50% of cultures are below average, and maybe we just need to bring up that average rather than looking at the few outstanding examples. That being said, again, as I said earlier on, Colin, I feel this great resignation or reshuffle is a great thing, because ultimately it's people choosing. It's like what you said right at the beginning, right? Right at the beginning, Hilton, you said that culture is about what we would be willing to put up with. I mean, what is the worst behavior that we would be able to tolerate? And I think that is the same of the world's workforce. What is the worst behavior that we will be able to tolerate? And if we have the privilege to make a choice, then I think we owe it to those who don't to make that choice and to say, no, we will not tolerate this from your organizations. Oh, I can always choose my behavior. It's hard, but it's possible.
How you choose to show up. I mean, you can
Yes.
choose to, and again, there's a lesson from my teenage daughters every day. How do you choose to show up? Again, Serena,
I know you have to go. So one last word of wisdom before we close for the day. What would you like to say?
Wow, I hadn't actually prepared for a word of wisdom. I think if I leave anybody who's watching this with one thought, it would be, your culture is a competitive advantage for your organization. And it's not something solely led or dictated by the people at the top of the food chain. Each and every one of us has an opportunity, has a choice to create a microcosm of culture around us that should advance and help the people we work with, and in so doing, allow them to be successful, so ultimately your organization can be successful. But it is a choice. The choice is yours as a leader. How do you choose to lead yourself, and how do you choose to lead the people around you? That is ultimately up to you. But Serene, again, thank you. Thank you. This has been a wonderful way to start my Thursday.
Yes.
A beautiful group who threw me some bloody hard questions, and I thank each of them for that.
Yes.
But thank you for your time. It's been an absolute delight.
Yes. Thank you very much, Hilton. Thank you as well to Warrior, to Colin, to Tiffany, and to all of you who have supported me. That is Hilton's contact on LinkedIn. So please connect with him if you are, you want to hear more from him. And next week, I have Dennis, and we will be talking about conspiracy to mediocrity, how the world is conspiring to make us all mediocre. So thank you so much. Thank you, Hilton, especially thank you. And we'll see you next week then. Bye-bye.